Welcome back, dear students. Now today in the concept class 4, we'll be talking about the last scholar, sociological thinkers. That is the G.H. Mead. The new edition, though it's long that this G.H. Mead has been there. And the certain range of questions which have been opened up from the G.H. Mead is either in terms of symbolic interactionism, self, I and me, and they have also asked the symbolic interactionism as a critic to positivism. So if you remember the moment we started talking about sociology as a science, and more precisely when we started talking about positivism vis-a-vis non-positivism, I said that your focus should not be to understand what positivism and non-positivism debate is, but further breaking the non-positivist perspective into the different approaches, right from the interpretivism to symbolic interactionism to phenomenology to ethnomethodology. And in this very perspective, this symbolic interactionism of G.H. Mead, which will emerge as a non-positivist stand, that has to be understood. So the question should be there, either you need to, in terms of the critique to positivism, or certain questions were there. Sometimes you also need to understand that you might have now become aware of that certain applied questions are coming out. Though prima facie, the moment you are looking at the thinkers, the question which has been raised may not be there in their themes, their sub-themes. But the perspective and the theoretical methodological dimensions what they have talked about, if you apply that one, it will be easier in terms of understanding that one. So the gender kind of question which has been there, when you're looking at the PYQs, I have always said that when we're talking about all the concept classes, I'm also talking about the PYQs. All right. And if you do the PYQs, let me say that do not look at the PYQs merely as a questions for your preparation, questions for your practice. PYQs would also be looked by you to understand the different dimensions of the related topic, the related theme. Approach that one. So through PYQs, not only do your writing practice, your understanding, but also approach the syllabus through this very perspective. So today we'll pick up at another one, that is George Herbert Mead, G.H. Mead. And what are the things? Syllabus has been kept in such a manner in G.H. Mead. Then many a times I have said this line and I still wondering upon that whether we wanted to do justice the entirety of G.H. Mead, or only for the sake of introducing some psychoanalysis or psychoanalytical dimension, we use the G.H. Mead in a sociological tradition. There are many areas from G.H. Mead from where the very good questions could be anticipated, could be formulated. And in this very perspective, the way we have approached the 5 thinkers, we'll also be approaching in terms of the first, that is called methodological concerns. And after this, we'll be talking about concept of self. All right. Related with the concept of self would be the development of self. So let me bifurcate it. It will be part of this one. That is and then very few, 1 or 2, 3, that way we will be talking about criticism and evaluation. This part from here we're talking about development of self and concept of self. We find about the two concepts. The concept of I and me, and also the play stage and the game stage. You need to understand them and combine them to reflect the two components of self in terms of I and me. So here we're talking about I and me. Please do not stop there. Go beyond in your analysis. Go beyond in your writing. And that would be I in me. We'll just be talking about. And you also talk about many I's and many me's. Alright? Your understanding of Mead in terms of the self or the development of self should not be restricted merely writing in terms of I to me. Go further. Alright? And try to relate that in terms of the play stage and game stage. And there's a very good quotation beta by the G.H. Mead that a child can play alone. Game requires a team. So there could be questions on generalized others. Yet another concept which is coming in Mead, that is concept of generalized others. However, I don't know how you people have been taught, how you people have been approaching G.H. Mead. It's very ironical. I find that whenever the G.H. Mead is talked about with the 2 or 3 pages, you talk about the G.H. Mead. True. In comparison to the previous 5 thinkers, it will take very less time to understand Mead. But the moment you start looking at the certain base, the socio-historical base, background, you will be finding about the methodological concerns emerging in G.H. Mead's writing. And why G.H. Mead takes a non-positivist stand. And thus time and again I have said that sociology is a scientific discipline. So your approach should also be scientific. It should not be rote learning. It should not be merely mug-up kind of perspective. And thus, if I now, apart from this, talk about G.H. Mead and pick up methodological concerns, right, in which you will be basically first talking about symbolic interactionism. And symbolic interactionism also as a non-positivist stand. Apart from this, there have been a very deep influence on Mead of the certain scholars. The two which are the most prominent one through which you will be understanding that where Mead's theoretical dimension or methodological concerns are evolving. One is the German idealism, more precisely the perspective of Hegel. So the second one in terms of B is impact of German idealism, in which we will be talking about Hegel and his analysis of emergence. Same Hegel, from whom the dialectical method was borrowed by Marx, and whose idealism was replaced by Marx in terms of dialectical materialism. So we are talking about the dialectical idealism and its impact on a Hegel. And the third one, number C, is impact of Darwin. Natural selection and variance. And why I am picking up this? Because let me quote one line of Mead. Mead says, though the propositions of Hegel, which are philosophical, and the propositions of Darwin, which are scientific, there seems to be poles apart. But I find a sync between them. And in this very perspective, the concept of generalized others would reflect the impact of German idealism. I repeat, the concept of generalized others, what we will be talking about, or what you are reading or what you have read in G.H. Mead, is highly indebted to German idealism and particularly Hegel's perspective. And when I talk about emergence and novelty from the Darwin's natural selection and variance or variation, you will be talking about the impact on I and me. The various alternatives proposed by I before me and the selection by the me. That way, some sync between this Hegel and Darwin would be found, one being purely philosophical, that dimension, one being purely scientific dimension. You know, it's a very painful, let me share this personal experience of mine, that many a times I have always been said that sir goes so deep. But that is for your betterment, dear. I want you not to mug up anything. I want to prepare you in such a manner that your comfortability and your conceptualization process must evolve to the level where nothing is new to you. No books, no other perspective could provide something new to you. And that way that has to be talked about. And you might have realized, being a student of civils, that in the last so many years, and even this year, those who are taking the mains, in their success, optional would be the two prominent dimension. And everyone is getting the rank, everyone is being selected in civils, since they have done very well in their optionals, which requires some hard labor, which requires some innovative approach, and it requires the originality. And that's why these two, which I am talking about. And we'll also be talking about, apart from this, the impact of Wilhelm Wundt, a German scholar, the famous dog fight, through which you would be able to understand significant and non-significant gesture, the idea of, the concept of significant and non-significant gestures. And Mead would also be recognizing the impact of Einstein relativity. So that would be D, impact of Einstein and his relativity. Here, with this impact of the Einstein's relativity, Mead moves away from the determinism, what the positivists are talking about. He accuses positivists of being a deterministic, pre-Einsteinian, pre-Newtonian era. And the kind of indeterminism what will be emerging in his writing will make him move towards the non-positivist stand. And then the behaviorist, he will also be moving from the C.H. Cooley. I don't know whether you have heard this name. Yet another name in a symbolic interactionism from the Chicago tradition, who is known for his concept on the looking glass self. That as you see your physical image in a mirror, so you see your social image in a society. And thus the three lines which will be coming out. What ego thinks, what ego is. What ego thinks, alter thinks ego is. And what ego thinks, alter thinks ego is. फिर से बोलता हूं सुनो. What ego thinks he is. What alter thinks ego is. What ego thinks, alter thinks ego is. For example, I think I am very smart. What you think, I look. What I think, you think I look. Alright, that was the looking glass self concept has been provided. Mead also becomes critical of this one. When you say the self and mind develops, and in this very perspective, the certain background of G.H. Mead has to be understood by us. And from here, the concept of self, development of self, some views on a society, language, they all would be emerging out. In which the symbolic interactionism has to be talked about. Now let me make a diagram so that you would be able to understand, approach G.H. Mead in a better manner. But please do not laugh, because I am not a good artist. What I am basically trying, I am making two people. What I basically intend to make you understand, this is in two boys. One is basically looking at this side. His back is here in terms of norms, values, status, role. And here, norms, values, roles, status. The actor is confronting them. That's why I made the eye looking at this side. It means if the norms, values, role and status is there, then in the first diagram, it is on the back. But in the mid, it is here, confronting it. So on the basis of the first one, the actor would evaluate these norms, values, roles, and that way his behavior could be found. All right. But here, the actor is evaluation in a particular situation. It means here, situation is important. On the particular situation, as he will be evaluating these norms, values, roles, status, would be his understanding. And would be the understanding would be leading to behavior. The first one is functionalist or positivist approach. The second one, where the actor is an active field, not passive recipient. So here this is called symbolic interactionism and will be non-positivist stand. ये डायग्राम याद रखना है बेटा. This diagram has to be remembered by you. Here is the passive self, one who has been prepared, socialized. He evaluates that one and he behaves. But in a symbolic interactionism of Mead, self is active, who in a different situation will evaluate, will understand and then behave. So the kind of determinism which was found in the first diagram is lacking in the second one. And that way this indeterminism which will be coming out. Here the Mead will be moving towards the non-positive stand, in which the impact of Einstein on Mead would be higher. This is the background. Now when we are looking at the G.H. Mead, an American social psychologist, philosopher, sociologist, affiliated with the Chicago School, is considered to be one of the important pillars in the development of socio-psychological thoughts. And one of the most important contributor to the theory of symbolic interactionism. Though broadly we have been talking about symbolic interactionism and we talk about the two names C.H. Cooley and G.H. Mead. But you need to remember that it was one of the students of G.H. Mead, Herbert Blumer, who basically initiated symbolic interactionism. And you also need to know that in the entire lifetime, no book was published by G.H. Mead. Though he published many articles, there were many articles which are unpublished. So after his death, his students and his wife, they basically compiled them, and that way the 4 books emerged out, in which mind, self and society, that will become the more important, from where this syllabus has been taken out. And in this very context, I am saying that G.H. Mead seems to be one of the very strong pillars of the symbolic interactionism. Now, what is symbolic interactionism? I am giving you 2 or 3 dimensions so that you will be able to comprehend it easily. Symbolic interactionism is a school of thought that emphasizes on a common set of symbols and thinkings possessed by people in a group. Common set of symbols and thinkings possessed by a common people in a society. It means symbolic interactionism is primarily a socio-psychological perspective which focuses on individual with self. Interaction between individuals, internal thoughts, emotions and social behavior, where the form of interaction that emerges is from a situation concerned. Look at the diagram. Now let me pick up at another dimension. Symbolic interactionism is a perspective that studies group life and human behavior by emphasizing social action and social processes in which interaction is continuously defined, redefined and reshaped in the sense that how the individuals understand the world around them and how they socially construct the meaning. How the individuals understand the world around them and how they socially construct meaning. It means symbolic interactionism is a micro-level theory, primarily focusing on the relationship among individuals within the group or society and the communication, that is the exchange of meaning through language and symbols by which people make sense of their world. Thus, symbolic interactionism would view actors or individuals as active rather than passive in shaping the world rather than simply acted upon. Actor would act, not simply being acted upon. Here, it means symbolic interactionism, or in symbolic interactionism, self becomes central as an acting organism and not merely the passive receptible field which simply receives and responds. What does it imply? When you're talking about that the actor is not passive receptible field, rather it is an acting organism, it implies that symbolic interactionism would offer the analysis of social life different from functionalist, different from positivist, who are simply stressing, the functionalists are simply stressing on the norms, which implies that most interactions are fixed. Because you have been prepared through the norms, values, roles, status. So most of the interaction seems to be fixed in advance. Thus, functionalist approach is focusing a straight jacket approach. A straight jacket approach है बेटा. एक हो गया, everything is there. No. The moment you say the actor is not passive receptible field, rather the actor is an active field, active organism who do not simply receive and respond. That's why I say that in a different situation, he'll evaluate this. He will understand this according to the situation, and then he'll indulge in a behavior. And that way the kind of indeterminism which will emerge out would be different from one another. For example, tomato is to be eaten either in terms of chutney, either in terms of puree, either in terms of the vegetables, or you can put that on dressings like on the pizzas and other things. But many times, when you are pushed to the wall, tomato could also be used to protect yourself, could be used as a weapon to throw and hurt someone. In this situation, the active organism, that is actor, in that situation has evaluated that differently. So there is no straitjacket approach. There is no deterministic perspective what the functionalists or positivists are providing. And here, the perspective of symbolic interactionism as an active organism, actor as an active organism, interacting with others, symbols, languages, meanings, all will become the part within which the symbolic interactionism that has to be understood, or how the actors would be understanding the world around them. And in this case, once again I am repeating, Mead is considered to be one of the giants in the symbolic interactionism. Though we also need to remember that it was Herbert Blumer, president of Mead, who coined the term symbolic interactionism and outlined its basic premises. What are the basic premises? That humans interact with things which is based on meaning attributed to the thing. Number two, the ascribed meaning of the things come from individuals' interaction with others in group or society. And number three, the meaning of the things are interpreted by an actor while dealing with the things in a specific circumstances. Same चीज है बेटा, मैंने इसको ब्रेक कर दिया. Mead in his lifetime wrote many books or many articles, published, unpublished, which after his death were compiled by his wife and residents into the 4 books, in which Mind, Self and Society is the most prominent publication from where the syllabus has come. in the sociological tradition. Up to this, all 6, now we are comparing it. The 5 which you talked about in terms of Karl Marx, Emile Durkheim, Max Weber, Talcott Parsons, and Robert King Martin. And when we are comparing these 5, and also some other prominent scholars with the Mead, we find one very particular change. And that is, these all 5 scholars, right from Marx to the Martin, somehow or another, sometime or other in their life, they felt a sense of marginalization in the society. Either being a Jews or somewhere being sidelined in academics. So some sort of marginalization has been felt by these scholars from Marx to Durkheim to Weber to Parsons to the Martin. But this perspective of marginalization is not applied on G.H. Mead. And how? Since his family of origin, education, lifestyle, professional career, all showed a conformity to the American value of democracy, social reforms, and scientific optimism. So that way, that marginalization is not there in G.H. Mead. कभी और deep जाएंगे, Hull House पढ़ेंगे, where he has made his daughter-in-law to be the part of this when his son dies. And she became prominent in terms of the gender writings, feminist writings. So somewhere we are finding about a certain set of good life conformity in terms of the origin of family, his own professional careers, all right, which is in tune with the American value of democracy, social reforms, and a scientific optimism. The intellectual development of Mead reflects the impact of many scholars, within which German idealism of Hegel, evolutionism of Charles Darwin are most significant. I quote 2 scholars better. One scholar is Michel Abloufia, MITCHELL, Michel Abloufia, ABLOUFIA, Abloufia. He comments that Mead's indebtedness, especially to German idealism, has not been addressed in depth what it merits. Hans Joas, H-A-N-S, Hans Joas, J-O-S, the another scholar, he writes that the key figure in the beginning of Mead's emphasis has been Charles Darwin. That's why here in terms of writing I said that in the intellectual development, socio-historical background, or even in terms of the methodological concerns, evolutions of methodological concerns in Mead, 2 scholars and their impact seems to be very significant on Mead. That is Hegel and Charles Darwin. Now let me pick up one by one. Mead's emphasis on in the process of emergence is indebted to Hegel. How? Hegel has rejected the division of society into a priori, that is a fixed category. Since Hegel insists that a reality one encounters is in a continuous process of transformation. The reality one encounters is in a continuous process of transformation. Can I ask you to use the law of dialectics in terms of thesis, antithesis, synthesis? Are you able to recall it? Are you able to relate it now? So when you say about a statement of truth thesis having an opposite statement of truth antithesis, at a higher plane they will collide to produce synthesis. And synthesis will be giving you to thesis having antithesis. The present scenario that will come out will also make you understand that how imperfectly you had understood yourself. The certain kind of novelty is there. The certain kind of emergence is there. And in this very perspective, it does not seem to be a priori or fixed category. How the new form emerges from the old one, in which the dialectics as a method becomes important in the Hegelian perspective. Hegel also analyzes identity in terms of subject-object orientation. Do you remember when I talked about that, how Hegel has basically talked about the alienation in terms of subject-object inverse, within which Hegel has basically talked about objectification and alienation. That whenever a man tries to produce something, he becomes an object for the others. He is detached from the humanity which he belongs to. But this objectification is necessary, because the day he produces this one, he is no more an object for others. So the way Hegel has talked about the object-subject relationship, Mead has borrowed that one. And argues, mind the line beta, argues that the development of self requires the notion of reflexivity, putting yourself in a place of others. When the actor becomes an object for others, self develops. So by borrowing this idea of Hegel in terms of that nothing is a priori category, fixed emergence is there, subject object, when I becomes an object for others, it turns to the me. Abhi aayenge beta. So in this subject object dimension, so Mead is saying development of self requires the notion of reflexivity, that is the idea of subject to become object for himself as a result of taking the attitude or role of others, taking the attitude of others who are involved with this conduct. So now, subject to become object for oneself. This will be used in I and me and its emergence. And once the subject becomes an object for oneself, he would be having the attitude of others. That attitude of others who are involved in the process of interaction, in which the concept of generalized others would be coming out. So in a Mead's theory of generalized others, that is, expectations of the wider community, which one belongs to, becomes important, which somehow or other seems to be indebted to the idea of German idealism, precisely Hegel, his emergence and subject-object relationship. Mead argues that through this reflexivity, social process is brought into the experience of individual. It means reflectiveness is an essential condition within the social process for the development of mind. When the child is born, he does not have a mind. Self and society are intertwined. If such kind of statements which you have read, which you are preparing, you need to understand that why Mead is taking this one. And in this very perspective, once again I am saying, the perspective of emergence, subject-object relationship, would be having an impact on Mead, with which he will be talking about reflexivity, he will be talking about understanding of the social process, and also his idea of generalized others, that would be indebted to German idealism and Hegel. The influence of Hegel on Mead is only matched by Charles Darwin. Though the assumptions of both Hegel and Darwin are altogether different from one another, are contradictory, if I could use this line. Hegel is talking more philosophical, metaphysical dimension. Darwin is talking more scientific. That Hegel emphasis is on philosophical explanation, whereas Darwin focuses on biological theorizing. If Hegel focuses on the idea that reality is in constant process of evolutionary emergence, then Darwin describes life as a process of giving rise to varying structural forms. Natural selection है बेटा, natural selection and variation है. origin of a species. However, Mead finds a fundamental harmony in the ideas of Hegel and Darwin. In Darwin, he sees an incorporation of indeterminism. How the species will evolve, that is not fixed. There is a certain dimension of indeterminism. And thus, in Darwin, he sees, or Mead is seeing, an incorporation of indeterminism and novelty, newness, and also the random variation at selection in environmental condition, showing flexibility in life. Let me give an example. In a different situation, the alternatives given by I to me, only those me surviving which are in tune with the environmental and societal expectations. So that way, this I and me, this perspective which we are looking at, somehow or other, without Darwin's biological theorizing, biological or the natural selection and variations, you would not be able to understand it. Thus, to Mead, Hegelian dialectics parallels Darwin's mode of selection in terms of a species. Mead writes that the random variation of action presented by I is selected by me. Alright? And those me's which are in tune with the social expectation, in tune with the generalized others. Apart from these two scholars, Mead's development of self is intimately tied to language, is highly influenced by the German scholar Wilhelm Wundt and his analysis of gesture. Where, what is gesture? Gestures are to be understood as the behavioral response of organism to the stimuli. Gestures as the behavioral responses of organism to the stimuli, to other organism. Here Mead provides the famous example of dog fight, in which a dog barks and the second dog barks or growls, or either run away. Here the meaning of barking is found in the response of the second organism, initiated by the first organism. First dog has barked. In response of this one, the second dog has either barked, growl, or he has run away. So the response in the second organism is initiated by the first one. But the dogs do not understand the meaning of gestures. Why the dog has barked and how this growling has been done, how that response has been provided by the second organism is not understood. Rather, they simply respond, which Mead calls non-significant gesture. But it is not there with the man. A smoker extending his hand in a room towards a matchbox and a pack of cigarette, and the non-smoker either moving out or opening the windows or opening the doors. None has said anything. But the moment one has extended his hand towards a pack of cigarette and a lighter, it has responded, a response in a second organism, either moving out, opening of the window or door, all right, in which there is a meaning attached to it. This is called symbolic gesture. In the dog fight, we had talked about non-significant gesture. Mead argues that for a gesture to be significant, it must call out in second organism a response which is functionally identical to the response that the first organism anticipates. Gesture to be significant must mean same to both the actors, to both the organisms. Since meaning involves the capacity to consciously anticipate how others organism will respond. Lado beta yahan pe, just bring out the language. When I am speaking, you are understanding. When I will be saying something, you will be understanding that meaning. Being a part of that culture, being part of that society, being a part of that group, we understand these gestures, which have a meaning. We have conveyed some meaning. Symbolically, we have conveyed the meaning. Any sign which has a meaning is a symbol. Any symbol devoid of meaning is a sign. Sociologically speaking, symbol is something that stands for something, means for something else. So language is understood. Those people who are speaking the language, they are able to communicate with this one, which we talked about in symbolic interactionism. So this is significant gesture. Thus to Mead, gesture becomes significant when it is implicitly arises at the same response in the second organism. What does it mean? It means the gesture would become significant when there is a meaning. I repeat, gesture would become significant when there is a meaning, attitude or idea behind it. And in this very perspective, you talk about language. All right? Here, though this has not been opened up in your syllabus, here Mead provides the example of social action consisting of two or more actors influencing each other through the conversation of gestures. Significant gesture, beta. Influencing each other through the conversation of gestures. It also implies that significant symbol of gestures depends on common interpretation of meaning. Why common interpretation? Because you are part of the group, you are part of that society, you are part of that culture, in which language is most significant. Mead is also influenced by theory of Einstein's relativity, as he finds that Einstein is important in illustrating relativity of a perspective, implying that an individual's action is variable in terms of time, space, and past experiences. An individual's action is variable in terms of time, space, and past experiences. More generally, relatively means that social is the emergent phenomena, not the fixed category. Theory of relativity reflects that science must take into account multiplicity of perspective simultaneously, since as one changes one's perspective, the observed relationship with that object also changes. In this context, here, Mead moves away from the deterministic views of the positivists, whom Mead attributes to be pre-Newtonian, pre-Einsteinian page, providing room neither for multiplicity of perspective nor for indeterminism. What is accusing to positivist? कि वो pre-Newtonian है. They belong to the pre-Newtonian phase, neither providing room for the multiplicity of perspective nor for indeterminism. And thus, with his symbolic interactionism, Mead moves towards non-positivist stand. I hope, and I'm quite sure, that now you have understood Mead. Mead, in his Mind, Self and Society, primarily emphasizes on the development of self and mind. To Mead, mind and self only develop in society, and society also changes by the individual. This dialectical interdependence between individual and society is predicted on communication, and the individual and society is having the ability to understand one another. The development of mutual understanding in Mead's views is the adaptive advance separating humans from animals. सोच भी रहे ना, अगर हम सोच भी रहे ना, some future, what will happen in future? We are planning. Suppose we are planning. Are you not planning that how will be clearing civils? Is not something which is going in our mind. That planning is not going in animals. So this adaptive advance separates humans from the animals, since humans are able to understand collective action through communication. The central point in human communication is the ability to take the role of others, the ability to take the same attitude towards oneself that the community expects from you. The essential condition for the development of mind is that individual is acting in response to the environment. When self objectifies himself, he attains self-consciousness. Self-consciousness can be seen in children playing when children refer themselves as Doraemon, Tom, Nobita. है ना, ये सब बदमाश हैं बेटा कुछ कार्टून कैरेक्टर्स के, Tom and Jerry. And sometimes you'll find about the child saying, Tom wants this, Tom loves this, Tom loves butter, cheese, or Jerry loves cheese. So when the children are playing, when children refer themselves as Doraemon, Tom, Jerry, Nobita, and when they say Nobita, Tom does this and so on. In this context, Mead writes that human beings are only human when reflective mind takes self as an object. Subject becoming an object for oneself. Abhi aapne Eagle mein kiya. Now look at its impact. That human beings are only humans when reflective mind takes self as an object. It also means that there is no mind, there is no self apart from society. Self and society are intertwined. Mind and self develops in society. Reflective allows humans to work together, to envisage the future, to imagine object situations that are not physically present. It also makes us plan future behavior towards an object and situation, and also towards those objects and situations which you are basically projecting that it may happen, implying that mind and society itself develops from the social experience by taking the role of others, including the generalized others, which is an individual's organized community. In one liner, I said concept generalized others, an individual's organized community and social group. The concept of generalized others is central to Mead, which involves individual's ability to objectify self. I said individual's ability to objectify self by taking the role of others. Generalized others exert social control, thereby ensuring certain predictability in the human's life. And now, from here now, Mead moves towards number one, the stages through which the capacity to take the role of others develop. How will be taking the role of others? How this reflectivity will be coming out? How will be having the expectations of generalized others? Now, Mead is moving towards the certain stages in which play and a game stage would be coming out. And then Mead is also talking about the predictability of the social life. The capacity to develop the ability to take the role of others takes place in two stages. The first one is the play stage, where child takes the role of few significant others. Father, mother, some relatives who are close to him, a child playing a doctor, child playing a cops and thieves. He has taken the role. Usually you'll find about that if the father is a doctor, the son will put the stethoscope, put it, and he will start behaving as if he's a doctor. All right. And investigating the certain kind of disease. If the father is or mother is a cop, then he will be putting up the gun and he will be behaving as if he is chasing the thieves. It means here in the play stage, the child is basically adopting the role of the significant others. So let me say that this concept of significant other has not been provided by Mead. Mead's concept is generalized others. In opposition to this, we have talked about the significant others. And game stage involving the ability to understand the connectivity between roles. What I have told you, a child can play alone, a game requires a team. I don't know whether you have seen it in your home or not. If you look at a certain growing child and if you give him a bat or ball, he'll go downstairs to play with his peers. But he will not share his bat and ball. And he is not bothered whether the game continues or not. If he'll come to the house, he will play alone. But Mead provides the example of a baseball in which every actor, every player will have to be a batter, will have to be a bowler, will have to be a fielder. It means here in the baseball game, in the game stage, child learns putting himself in the place of others, becoming an object for oneself. Subject-object relationship is inversed. And then he tries to understand what expectations are there. This is the initial stage where he starts through the rules of the game. He starts understanding the expectations of the generalized others, the wider community or group which he belongs to. I talked about this, the capacity to take the roles of others. In a very brief, I talked about the play stage and game stage. And now here Mead, in his Mind, Self and Society, argues that self emerges by the process of socialization in the context of society itself, in which one is a part of. This content of self-realization emerges from the perception of how others perceive, since on the basis of this judgment one makes, and consequently one tries to internalize the expectations, role obligations, and consequently develops self. This very sentence of Mead also implies that man is not born with self. Rather, self develops in society. Self and society are intertwined. And in this very perspective, we'll be talking about the dimensions. Together we'll be talking about play stage and a game stage. In a play stage, child takes the role of few significant others, like parents or very close to him. Child, while playing with the dolls, responds in a tone, voice, attitudes similar to the response of the parents or the significant others towards him or her. It is the stage of simple role taking, and only one role at a time. Simple role taking and only one role at a time. The relationship between roles is not clearly understood by the child. But the moment the child has come to the game stage, which is an ability to understand the connection between roles, at this stage, child not only takes roles of others, but also assumes the various roles of other participants of the game. That's why I gave you the example of baseball, where the child will have to be a bowler, to be a batter, to be a fielder, putting himself in the others. Thus, he is having the expectation, the role of other participants of the game. And thus he learns to govern his actions accordingly. All those people, all those players who are participating into it. Child also learns to exercise control on the self in the game stage and others' relation to the self. The character of the game, Mead says, is such that every act in the game is determined and qualified by all other acts, which is expressed in the rule of the game, implying in each other a generalized player. When he becomes a bowler, batter, fielder. So in each player is a generalized player. It means the rule of the game is such there that the actor the subject by becoming an object for oneself, he is putting himself in a place of others. He is taking the role of others. That reflexivity is learned. And in each player there is a generalized player. At this stage, child learns to function as an organized whole, begins to learn the ability to take the role of others, that is, the generalized others. And thus Mead writes that child can play alone, but game requires a team. And now once we have done this one, in terms of taking the role of others, now Mead is taking the self that develops by taking the role of others is me. Once again I am saying, the self that develops by taking the role of others is a me. In the symbolic relationship between these two, that is I and me, usually me prevails. but impulsive, uncontrolled behavior that occurs reflects that me does not determine the response of I. अभी इंट्रैक्शन देखेंगे. So in this very perspective, in this game stage, in these different stages of play in a game, now we are coming to the two components of self. That is I and me. All right. Now in this very perspective, we are talking about the me, talking about the I. The self, once again I am saying, the self that emerges by taking the role of others, Mead calls it me. Me contains the knowledge of roles, expectations, structures, values, beliefs, and the implication for the self-action. It also represents self-control on the expression of me against I. I, on the other hand, is an organized response of an organism. Unorganized response of an organism. It is a spontaneous disposition, an impulse to act. All right. Now, in this very perspective, we also need to know about the two dimensions. Now, let's go in terms of the detail. All right. In terms of the I and me, all right. Simple line, I and me component, the self composed of two, I and me. Me is by taking the role of others. I is the organized, unorganized response of an organism. It is a spontaneous disposition, an impulse to act. All right. However, we also need to know that certain incalculable response or a spontaneity, I repeat, certain incalculable spontaneity or response of I allows for certain degree of innovation and freedom from the control of others. Let me give you the example. When we will be going for the personality test interview, he many times writes about the hobbies. Don't you think hobbies is the very expression of I, which makes you move away from the routine life? In a modern society, we will be talking about this one. And it's expression of I. It is that spontaneity of I in which we are indulged into. It also means that I is a creative, imaginative part of the self. Incalculable spontaneity. And thus, I, which we are talking about as an unorganized disposition, unorganized response. Now we are refining that I. I is also a creative, imaginative part of self, which Mead believes is found in, or most visible in the artists, the creative people who indulge in unconventional act, manifesting a strong expression of I. It means self consists of acting I, when self is a subject, and acted upon by me, when self is an object. I repeat the line. Self consists of the acting I, when self is a subject, and acted upon by me, when self is an object, subject. Thus, self is an ongoing process between these two phases, that is I and me, enabling us to understand the conscious perspective. And if self does not have, Mead says, if the self does not have these two processes, these two phases, I and me, there will be no conscious perspective and there will be nothing novel in experience in humans. The self that develops that by taking the role of others is me. All right? And in the symbolic interactionism between I and me, usually me prevails. But sometimes, outrageous act. Living in Delhi, particularly in urban centers, the metropolitan, we find about it how the traffic outrages takes place. Here, I has become prominent than me. Usually, in impulsive, unconventional behavior. Me does not determine the expression of I. ऐसा क्वेश्चन एक्सप्रेस कर सकते हैं बेटा, रोड रेस को लेके, ट्रैफिक वाले डोमेन पे. However, in unusual occasion, I and me become one. How? The Mead provides the example of the in a highly emotional and collective situations, such as religious or patriotic occasion. There is a peculiar sense of exaltation when you become taking part in the religious rituals, or when you have gathered with a certain patriotic occasion. Self-exaltation takes place. A particular sense of exaltation is coming place. That's why the reaction what one is looking in himself or making for himself, it is also expected from others. So what you are indulged into, what were the reactions which you are indulged into, what the response you are making for oneself, you are also expecting it from the others. And there I and me, in such unusual circumstances, in unusual occasions, become one. This ongoing interaction between I and me brings about a certain dynamism in society. And here now Mead is saying that Mead argues that all individuals see self-expression, especially when confined by routine work. Routinization prompts individuals to seek ways to express themselves, which is nothing but the expression of I. In the modern industrial society, where the functional differentiation has taken place, seems to be opposed to individuals' needs and ends, and thus hobbies, pleasure pursuits are typical of the expression of I. Due to the ongoing interaction between I and me, society is never static. Thus, in a Mead symbolic interactionism, emphasis is on the non-positivism, that indeterminism, and there he focuses on the interaction process. Biology may provide the capacity to develop mind and self, but only in social interaction one becomes human. It means self develops only when one takes the account of others' action and reactions. That is an ability to objectify oneself by taking the attitude of others, that is generalized others. Same thing. Play stage, game stage, I and me. All right. इसी को दूसरे ढंग से मैं इफ इज द डिफरेंट डायमेंशन, मीड, मैं कोट कर रहा हूं मीड को बेटा. मीड आउटलाइन द स्कीमा दैट चिल्ड्रन पास थ्रू एज दे मास्टर सोशलाइजेशन एंड इंटरलाइजेशन involving a critical passage from play to game stage. During the play stage, children take the role of significant others who have concrete existence. इस वर्ड को गौर करना. A simple role taking where the child has not been able to understand the interlinkages between the roles. But in this play stage, the role of the significant others what the child is taking, they have the concrete existence before him, making child to learn the role of and in game stage, child understand the different roles played by the members of the game, making child to learn the role of generalized others that exist in abstraction. अभी मैं बॉलर हूं, बैटिंग कर रहा हूं, तो मैं फील्डर की तरफ भी सोच रहा हूं, टीम की तरफ से सोच रहा हूं. राइट. सो थोड़ा सा एब्स्ट्रैक्शन है. प्ले स्टेज में कंक्रीट एग्जिस्टेंस, in a game stage, abstraction. During this stage, that is a game stage, the child will learn the role of generalized others. During this stage, children's activities become structured through rules, thereby preparing them for adult life, since one qualifies for membership of multiple groups. We also have multiple personalities, which Mead considers normal in order to accomplish the process of forming normal multiple personalities. And here with this, Mead is now introducing I and me. Me characterizes the attitude of the group and as such contains community standards. Me also represents a definite organization of the community in one's own attitude. Since we belong to multiple groups, here we must have more than one me's, multiple me's. यहाँ लिखा है मैंने, many I's, many me's. If the me's है तो उसके I भी होंगे. You do not talk religion to everyone. You do not talk about your love life to everyone. You will not share everything with everyone. You will not be talking politics to everyone. Thus, you belong to the different groups. And that's why I'm saying that you have the different me's. Alright. Me characterizes the attitude of the group and as such contains community standards. Me also represents a definite organization of the community in one's own attitude. Since we belong to the multiple groups, hence we must have more than one me's. Me is the organized set of attitudes of others, which one assumes, and by assuming attitudes of others, one internalizes. Me is the attitude of generalized others. However, a person with an overdeveloped me would also be hyperconformist, whose ideas are exactly the same as that of the neighbors. Thus, in the mechanical behavior, which results from this, Mead introduces I, that is each person's response to the attitude of generalized others. अब I का meaning बदलाओ बेटा. I and me, I to me, unorganized to the organized one. Now in the multiple one, when we are talking about the multiple me's as you belong to the multiple groups, and me is having the response to generalized others. Now here we are changing. That I is not only unorganized one. I is also the creative, imaginative part of the self. And thus in the mechanical behavior, which results from this, Mead introduces I, that is each person's response to the attitude of generalized others. Constrained in each me, the self is formed out of the conversation between I and me. This conceptualization of identity is accomplished by the fact that each person has multiple personality composed of more than one I and one me. From sociological point of view, Mead's me is something that could be empirically investigated, since me is the property of both the person and the group. Me also imposes an external constraint that exists. Alright? Here, the certain kind of external constraints in terms of sui generis will be coming out. So in all this perspective, what you need to talk about, the self consisting of two, I and me, subject object, play in a game stage, alright, significant and generalized others. This is Mead beta, in which we talked about that how the certain impacts have been found. इतना ही जानना है तुमको, because they have not opened up the social action. There could be a question on social action from comparative analysis between Weber, Parsons and Mead. That could be at another area which has not been opened up. But since I've given only one part, so there you remember this I, me, I in me, many me's with the many I's. Transformation from play to the game stage. And you just try to understand this one. Link this play game stage with I and me and their development. And the certain other combinations. I to me, I in me, many me's, having many I's, and this multiplicity of personality, which makes society not being static. Usually in the conversation between I and me prevails. But sometimes in terms of repulsive response, uncontrolled response, outrages outrageous behavior. Me is unable to control I. Sometimes I and me become one in terms of the religious and patriotic occasions. Whatever he expects from you, you also expect from those who are part of this gathering. All right? So nothing is static, society is not static. और यहां से कर लो. All right? But me का जो I है ना बेटा, अब यहां से समझो. Mead has been criticized more for I and its interpretation. Mead's conceptualization of I has generated more academic debate. Levi's writes that I is harder to pin down. In Mead's theory, it is too difficult to pin down what he means of I, since Mead uses I in different ways. कभी unorganized हो रहा है, कभी me में है, कभी different me के साथ उसका response है, reaction to the generalized others है. So this is the one criticism. Mead is also accused of avoiding chicken and egg hypothesis while dealing with individual society. Which came first, individual or society? So self develops, mind develops only in a society, in a social interaction. So he is accused of avoiding the chicken and egg hypothesis. Patrick Barrett argues that Mead also saw social life as consensual. कोई conflict नहीं है बेटा. Conservativist perspective दिखता है, consensual है. He is not talking about any other perspective in which the conflict tensions could take place. Whereas Raper argues that Mead views social activities as discrete episode without having any historical continuity. And that way you try to approach G.H. Mead. Alright? Look at this dimension, and that way these all 6 thinkers would be done by you. And I hope, and I'm quite sure, that now your perspective of understanding, right from the Karl Marx to Emile Durkheim to Max Weber to Talcott Parsons to Merton to Mead, that you are not only comfortable, you have become comfortable, but you will be conceptualizing them in their originality, and you would be able to look at all these PYQs. So many PYQs I have talked about. The 3 range of questions from Mead has been talked about. The symbolic interactionism has also been asked in Unit 2 in terms of critique to positivism, I told you. Then self and society, identity, that is being talked about. Concept of generalized others would be there. I and me and other perspective would be there. And in terms of the gender role, that the way the socialized, the moment you say me is socialized, that how in the society the boys and girls will be socialized. And they would be taking the role of or attitude of others, that is the generalized others. That expectation is there. So in terms of the socialization of boys and the girls, that expectation will be there. Such kind of questions have been opened up. They could also relate with a certain kind of road rage. Here I becomes uncontrollable, which is not managed by me. You know the idea when the certain kind of current questions comes out, certain kind of applied questions are asked to you. Your first perspective is to look at that situation, the question what has been asked by civils, and place that one in the broader dimension of the theoretical perspective of the thinker. Once you are able to place that one, you would be able to answer that one. And you would be able to answer that in a more structured manner. And with this, in the next concept class, we will be picking up the certain social institutions, the structures, and we will begin with the social stratification. And I request all of you to take the test, listen it. You all have my number. Any problem, just drop the message. All right? I'll ensure that nothing goes wrong. That I'll not be the cause of rejection, I have told you. And I'll also ensure that sociology does not become the cause of rejection. Provided the way I am talking, the way I am opening up the dimensions, the way I am quoting the scholar, the way I am explaining you, simplifying that one. You just go through that one and do your own labor. It is basically your success is a two-way traffic. I have opened up everything I have done from my part. Now this is you who will be jogging down, noting down something, writing it down, looking at the PYQs, asking yourself that if this question comes, what are the points to be picked up, making a certain kind of a structured synopsis, and that way the things would be done by you. Go through it, nothing will go wrong. And even if there, I'm there to talk about this one. All right? So we'll be meeting in the next class, and we'll be picking up some another concept. We will begin with the social stratification. Yet another important unit, with which we'll also be talking about the caste and other kind of perspective. That way the interlinkages would be coming out to you. Thank you. All right? All right? Wishing you all the best. Thank you.